Day 3 down at John Ashley, and we've got this, a TVR Tuscan S. I'm somewhat apprehensive about driving this car today for a very simple reason. You see, the TVR Tuscan for me is the one that got away. A few years ago, my mother owned a very nice 996 911 C4, and at the time that car was worth about the same amount as an entry-level Tuscan, and I was trying to persuade her to let me swap her 996 for a Tuscan owner that wanted something a bit more sensible and Germanic, and we found one to swap. It was beautiful in a colour called Atlantis Halcyon Blue, a BMW colour. I remember it very vividly. And the guy kind of agreed to do the deal, and Mum was just on the fence about whether she wanted to do it or not, and then by the time she said yes, the car had sold. You see, in many ways, the Tuscan is the perfect JayEmm's car. You see, I love coupes and bonkers looking cars, and this is a bonkers looking coupe, except, much like my father, I also like cars where the roof comes off. And if you like a coupe where the roof comes off, well, obviously you've got to have a targa top, which basically means you've got this and the Corvette, and, you know, the old Ferrari 355 and stuff, but that's a little bit out of my league. And this has a roof that comes off, and it also has a really big boot, and it doesn't have two piddly back seats that I'm never ever going to use. It's also British, loud, and pretty cool. I drove a couple of these many moons ago, about, 5 years before I started doing those YouTube lark, and I recall really quite liking the Tuscan. But will I still? We're going to find out in a minute, but before we do, I want to just talk you around this car. I mean, it is a mad looking thing, isn't it? This is really quite wonderful. Allegedly, the recently unfortunately passed away prodigy singer Keith Flint owned the Cerberus Speed 12, and let's face it, he's the kind of person that you associate with a TVR. A lot of people would think of something like a Jaguar as a pipe and slippers kind of car. A TVR is more of a cricket bat with a breeze block nailed to it kind of car. Now, this has a very different front to some of the earlier cars. It's still very much the same sort of chassis underneath, which is basically a steel ladder frame with outriggers and things on it, and this fiberglass body on top. Now, the heart of the Tuscan is the 4-litre straight 6 engine, developed in-house by TVR, and of course, nothing says success in a small British car firm like deciding to build your own engine. Why they decided to build two, because they'd already built their own V8, I do not know. Unfortunately, many of the Tuscan's issues are somewhat related to that engine. Now, opinions will vary as to how good or bad it is, but most people seem to agree with the fact that when they were new, these engines were awful. Not by design, but by the also now deceased owner of the company, Peter Wheeler, being a bit of a wise boy and not paying any of the bills that he owed, and so having to source his materials from some very suspect places, and so many of the cars failed, they had rebuilds, and a whole cottage industry has grown up around fixing and repairing these engines. Now, this is, as mentioned, the S, and there are a few ways to easily distinguish it. The easiest place to tell it from is the rear. Now, in the regular Tuscan, the indicators are small ovals up here, and they're one thing I really don't like about the car's design. In the S, they are integrated into the rear bumper down here. You have this little spoiler here, and the fairly obvious Tuscan S badging. Now, this Tuscan, as with basically every TVR, has an aftermarket exhaust system, and like every TVR owner, the lovely chap who's got this and who's let me drive it today says it's the loudest in the world. I've only heard it moving around a little bit, and well, he's not lying. The interior, this is clad in a mixture of leather and carpet in a number of shades of blue. It's not a bad place, although I prefer the slightly more dour colours, or alternatively more wacky, outrageous stuff like greens and oranges. This Speedo here, rather than moving smoothly, it actually ticks. And notice how there's almost no switchgear. In fact, I think there is nothing in here that has been nicked from another manufacturer's parts bin. You've got to admire that kind of dedication from the guys at TVR. This thing is just a bit nuts. I've never really been a big fan of this kind of setup here, just with these little air vents down here. It looks a little bit bulbous and a little bit weird, and the window dials rather than switches don't really work that smoothly either. What I do love though are the floor hinged pedals, which are very race car like, and the throttle in particular has a really long travel because that is your traction control. And now let's see what it's like on the road. And here's the funny thing about the Tuscan. For all of its wild, outlandish looks and that brutal, thunderous sound out the back, if you want it to be, it's actually a bit of a pussycat. But then, if you want it to be totally savage, it'll do that too. This is quick, really quick, and it responds so nicely. Now, I've driven big heavy cars with lots of power, and I've driven lightweight cars with relatively small power, and I can honestly say that when people say, oh well, if the power to weight ratio is the same, it'll feel the same, they don't. This is a rare example of a car which is very lightweight and also has shed loads of power, and it does sound evil, but it's also quite comfortable. I've driven very few cars as contradictory as this, and like I said, I have driven one previously, but it's been an awful long time. And it's so easy. Getting used to the clutch pedal has taken a few minutes, but that's nothing particularly unusual. The throttle pedal is very responsive, but does have that long throw, so you're not just getting spun down the road if you haven't asked for it. Now, okay, if it was soaking wet out there, I probably would have politely declined the kind offer to drive this car. However, it's not. Dear God! That's not even full revs. I'll do that in a minute, but I'm going to find a straight bit for that. But just, honestly, I'm really annoyed because I'm really liking this. Now, you get a bit of wind in your hair, but there's not actually a lot in the cabin. I'm probably speaking a bit louder than I actually have to, but... What a delightful thing this is. The steering's nice and light. That front end responds really quickly, and that is the source of some of the car's issues. The front end is quick, but the back end not so much. You can feel that the back end's a little bit on the ponderous side, and so you got a little bit of a mismatch between the two ends of the car as to whether they want to be sharp or not. And yes, there is no ABS, there is no airbag, there is no traction control. So the story goes that TVR were told that they had to have these things in. They just said, well, we didn't get that memo. Unfortunately, it is an example of a company where no matter how good the products were or were not, the company themselves were utter arseholes to deal with. I know people that were TVR main dealers that took deposits for cars that never materialised, and then when the customers wanted their deposits back, TVR said that they didn't have the money, and they did. And remember I said about some of the cars getting rebuilds at the factory? Well, those rebuilds could take an awfully long time. The reason being that if there was a car back at the factory for an engine rebuild and there was a new car nearing the end of the production line that didn't, let's say, have its aircon system because TVR hadn't paid their bills again, well, oh look, there's a car over there with an aircon system in it, and lo and behold, many cars were scavenged for parts while they were back at the factory for work. They were not the best businessmen, shall we say. But that was a long time ago. What we have left over from them are these utter throwbacks that are just wonderful. Some cars I get in and I go, yeah, this was cool, this was nice, this was fun for the time, and you go, oh well, I can understand in 1999 how this thing would have been fun, but this thing in 2019, this is still a mega smile machine. Now, I don't think I'd ever have the confidence to throw this thing down a road the same way that I used to with my Lotus Evora, or in fact any Lotus. That's just not what it is, but as a tool for just bimbling about and then having the odd bit of fun, oh, it's awesome. Now, the gearbox is actually relatively heavy, but very nice to use. Top tip, by the way, if you drive one of these, if you're trying to reverse, put it in fifth first, and then it won't crunch into reverse. But it's actually a more complete package than you'd think. This one's relatively well presented. It's not immaculate, but it's pretty clean. I think some of the switches and dials were a bit OTT, and younger me was really into that, and older me is kind of like, it is a bit in your face and garish. But you know what? It's part of the package. You got to take all of it or none of it. I was never really that big into the older cars. I drove a Chimera many years ago on the same day that I drove a Tuscan. And the Chimera was alright, but it just didn't drive like I wanted it to. The Tuscan, though, I really loved. And it turns out I still do. Oh, it moves. Oh, it really moves. You don't think you're going that quick, but you are. You really are. If this car were a character, it'd be Trevor Phillips. Now, if you want to buy one of these, the sole advice that I can really give you is buy one from someone that knows them. Make sure it's looked after. Have a bit of an oh shit fund. And then, honestly, just forget everything you've ever heard about them, because if you want to get in this every day and drive it to work and back, awful choice, terrible decision. But if you want to have something that on the right day, the right time of year, you're going to love to pieces, and it's also practical enough to drive around Europe. You'd be amazed, by the way, how many TVR owners drive them all over the place. I don't know any other group of car enthusiasts, certainly not small British car enthusiasts, that drive their cars so much. These people love them, and I totally get why. There's really not much else out there like it. Maybe the only thing that kind of comes close will be in left-hand drive, because this is way more raw than a Corvette. The only thing I can think of would be a Viper, but I've not driven one of them. Hope to fix that soon. But for now, just enjoy some more of this noise. Thank you for watching, guys. Hope you've been enjoying this series. We'll see you on the next one. Please do comment, hit the like button, and also subscribe if you haven't already, because it does make a big difference to me and the channel. Make stuff like this possible. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.